After my brother stole my life and made millions, I lived in poverty for 5 years. They say time heals all wounds. That's garbage. Time just gives you a better shovel to bury them deeper. I've been digging my hole for 5 years now, and it all started with a smell. Not perfume, not money, just a faint chemical whisper of the future that only my old dog Buster could detect in our garage that reeked of old socks and genius. My brother Leo caught a different scent, though. The smell of cash. Look, I'm not some bitter guy who blames everyone else for his problems. I'm a bioengineer. Was a bioengineer. I spent 7 years getting my PhD while Leo was busy failing upward through business school on Dad's dime. It was the story of our lives. I bring home an A+ on a physics exam, and my parents would say that's nice honey. Leo would sell his old baseball cards for a $50 profit, and they'd talk about his natural business acumen for a week. I was learning the laws of the universe. He was learning the laws of the market. Guess which one they valued more. I was 30 when I finally cracked it. The big idea. The one that makes you wake up at 3 in the morning scribbling equations on napkins. Biosensory detection. Sounds fancy, right? Let me break it down. You know how your smoke detector only screams at you when your kitchen is already on fire? Useless. What if you could predict the fire 10 minutes before it happened? What if you could smell the future? That's what I was teaching Buster to do. My lab was a garage in Pasadena that I rented for $800 a month. Buster was a 12-year-old chocolate lab I'd rescued from a shelter. The kind of dog that snores like a freight train and has breath that could strip paint. But that nose, that magnificent, wet, genius nose could detect volatile organic compounds at concentrations that would make a mass spectrometer jealous. I spent 18 months training him. Not like those airport dogs that sniff for substances. This was different. I was teaching him to recognize the specific chemical signatures that electronics emit right before they fail. Degrading capacitors, overheating circuits, the death rattle of silicon. It worked. I'll never forget the first successful test. I had this old power supply running hot on my workbench. Buster was sleeping in the corner, doing his impression of a furry earthquake. Then about 10 minutes before that power supply popped, he lifted his head, walked over, started this low, anxious whine while pawing at the ventilation grate. 10 minutes later, the thing went up in smoke. I wasn't looking at a pet trick. I was looking at the future of predictive maintenance. Data centers. Hospitals. Anywhere that couldn't afford downtime. This wasn't just a smoke detector. This was a prophet for the apocalypse of microchips. I called Leo the next day. Here's what you need to understand about my brother. Leo never met a room he couldn't work. He was the kid who sold lemonade for $3 a cup by telling people it was artisanal. He was a guy who could convince you to buy an umbrella in the desert by the time he finished his pitch. Our parents worshipped him. The golden child who could do no wrong. Me? I was the weird one who spent too much time with books and dogs. But Leo and I were brothers. We'd shared a room until I left for college. We played video games until dawn. We'd promised each other that when one of us made it, we'd bring the other along. Brothers before everything else. That's what we said. So when I showed him what Buster could do, I thought I was sharing a miracle. He showed up in his leased BMW, wearing one of those startup uniforms. You know the type. Expensive hoodie. Jeans that cost more than my laptop. Sneakers that hadn't seen a gym in their entire existence. He watched Buster predict another component failure with that calculating look he gets. The one that makes him look like he's doing math on your soul. Then he smiled. That big Leo smile that could sell snow to Alaska. He told me we were going to change the world together. 50-50, just like we always promised. I'd be the brain. He'd be the business. I'd create. He'd sell. Perfect partnership. He said I was sitting on a gold mine and just needed someone who spoke investor. I believed him. God, I was such an idiot. I gave him everything. My lab notebooks. 3 years of experiments, failures, successes, all documented in my terrible handwriting. The flash drive with all my data. Videos of Buster's reactions. Training protocols. Chemical analysis. The works. I handed him the keys to my future, and thought I was being smart, strategic, finally thinking like a businessman instead of a scientist. He said he needed it all to build the pitch deck, to talk to patent lawyers, to make this thing real. I trusted him because he was my brother. 3 months later, I got a Google alert with his face on it. Forbes magazine. The cover. Leo Reed, 30 years old, founder and CEO of Sensoria AI, the tech wunderkind who is revolutionizing predictive maintenance with artificial intelligence and advanced algorithms. Venture capitalists were throwing money at him like he discovered cold fusion. My name wasn't in the article. Not once. Not in the founder section. Not in the acknowledgments. Nowhere. I called him 17 times that day. 17. He didn't pick up. His assistant told me he was in meetings. Important meetings. With important people. Could she take a message? I drove to his new office instead. Palo Alto. Glass and steel, and minimalist furniture that cost more than cars. The receptionist looked at me like I'd tracked mud into a museum. When Leo finally came down, he didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed, like I was interrupting something crucial. He told me I didn't understand how business worked, how you couldn't put a dog on a patent application, how investors needed a clean story, not complications, how he'd taken my research and transformed it into something scalable, marketable, valuable, how he'd done me a favor by not listing me, because my lack of business experience would have scared away the smart money. He offered me a job, $25 an hour as a research consultant for my own invention. I went to my parents instead. This is the part that still keeps me up at night. The part that hurts worse than everything Leo did. Because Leo's a snake. That's his nature. But my parents, I thought they'd see what was happening. I thought they'd care. My mom made tea. Earl Grey. She always made tea when something was serious. My dad sat in his chair, the same chair he'd sat in for 30 years, looking uncomfortable. I told them everything. Showed them my notebooks, my dated entries, proof that this was my work, my discovery, my life. Mom patted my hand. Actually patted it, like I was 8 years old and upset about not making the baseball team. She told me I needed to stop living in my head, that ideas were just air until someone like Leo turned them into something real. He's building an empire, Alex, she said, her voice dripping with pride. And you're upset about a footnote in a magazine? Don't be so petty. Be proud of your brother. That family supported each other. And right now, Leo needed support as he built something incredible. Dad nodded along. Just nodded. Didn't say a word. They didn't choose Leo over me. They'd already chosen him years ago. I was just too busy with my equations to notice. They'd been investing in his future, his dreams, his potential. I was just a backup plan that never got called up from the bench. I walked out of that house and understood what it meant to be alone. But it got worse. Of course it got worse. Because life's funny that way. Sarah was the one thing in my life that made sense. We met at a coffee shop near campus 4 years earlier. She was getting her MBA. I was working on my dissertation. We bonded over our shared hatred of pretentious coffee names. She thought my work was fascinating. She thought I was brilliant. She loved that I cared more about discovery than dollars. Or so I thought. We were celebrating our 3rd anniversary at this Italian place in Santa Monica. Nothing fancy. Just good pasta and cheap wine. And the kind of easy conversation that makes you think you found your person. I'd saved up for 3 months to afford this meal. I was planning to talk about our future. Maybe moving in together. Maybe something more. She beat me to it. She told me she needed to talk about us, about our trajectory, about whether we were heading in the same direction. I thought she was going to propose. I'm not kidding. I actually thought that's where this was going. Instead, she told me about Leo. Not right away. She built up to it. Talked about how she'd been doing a lot of thinking about her career, her future, her goals. How she'd realized she needed a partner who was moving forward, not standing still. How she loved me, but love wasn't always enough. Then she dropped it. She'd been seeing Leo for 6 weeks. Started at one of his company events that she'd gone to for networking. He'd shown her what ambition looked like, what the finish line felt like when you actually cross it instead of just talking about it. She didn't ask for my blessing. She just told me it was happening. Then she stood up, left $40 on the table for her half of the meal we hadn't finished, and walked out to the Porsche waiting across the street. Leo's Porsche. He'd sent his car for her like she was a package being delivered. She didn't break my heart. Breaking implies some kind of accident. She performed surgery on it. Deliberate, precise, without anesthesia. I sat there for 20 minutes staring at my cooling pasta before the waiter quietly asked if I wanted boxes. I said no, paid, walked out into the LA night, feeling like I'd been erased from my own life. You'd think that was rock bottom, right? You'd be wrong. Rock bottom came 6 months later. Leo's company had just closed a Series B, $1 billion in funding. Billion with a B. The tech press couldn't stop writing about him. The youngest founder to hit unicorn status in biotech. The visionary who'd cracked predictive maintenance. The future of artificial intelligence in industrial applications. He threw a party. Rented out the entire top floor of some hotel in downtown LA. 500 people. Open bar. String quartet play in the corner, like we were in a movie about rich people. And he invited me. I don't know why I went. Maybe curiosity. Maybe self-destruction. Maybe some small part of me hoping he'd pull me aside and apologize. Tell me this had all gotten out of hand. Offer to make it right. I wore my only suit. 10 years old. Didn't fit quite right anymore. I felt like a kid wearing his dad's clothes to a funeral. The party was everything you'd imagine. Beautiful people in beautiful clothes drinking beautiful cocktails and pretending their conversations meant something. I stood near the back, nursing a beer that cost more than my monthly Netflix subscription, watching my brother hold court. Sarah was there. Of course she was. Wearing a dress that probably cost more than my car. She saw me, looked right through me, turned back to her conversation like I was invisible. Then Leo got on stage with a toast. He thanked the investors, thanked his team, thanked the universe for aligning in his favor. The crowd laughed at his jokes, applauded at his pauses, ate out of his hand like trained seals. Then he saw me, made eye contact across the room, and I swear, for just a second, I saw something flicker in his face. Guilt? Recognition? Or just a calculation of how to use this moment? He pivoted the speech, talked about inspiration, about how innovation came from unexpected places, how his older brother Alex had always been the creative one in the family, tinkering in garages with ideas that seemed crazy until they weren't, how those funny experiments with an old dog had reminded him that genius could hide anywhere. He raised his glass to me. The spotlight found me in the crowd. 500 heads turned. They applauded, politely, briefly, the way you clap when someone's kid finishes a mediocre piano recital. I was a footnote, an anecdote, a quirky origin story for his success. Leo went back to his speech. Sarah kissed him on stage. The crowd erupted, and I stood there in my old suit, holding my expensive beer, feeling like an exhibit in a museum of failure. I didn't stay for the rest of the party. I walked out, got in my 15-year-old Honda that barely started on cold mornings, drove home to my studio apartment in a neighborhood that was 2 years away from being gentrified, but not there yet. Buster was waiting for me. He's old now, gray around the muzzle, moves slower than he used to. His joints crack when he stands up, just like mine. But when I opened that door, he was there, tail wagging, tongue out, happy just because I'd come home. I sat on the floor. He curled up next to me, resting his heavy head on my lap. I buried my face in his fur and didn't cry. I was too empty to cry. But I made him a promise that night. I told him we'd prove them all wrong, that we'd show them what the unnecessary dog and his useless owner could really do. I just didn't know how yet. The apartment was quiet except for Buster snoring. Outside, L.A. hummed with life, with parties, with people celebrating successes that might or might not be theirs. Inside, it was just me and my dog and the wreckage of everything I'd built. They'd taken my ideas, my girlfriend, my family, my name. They took everything they could put a price tag on. But they couldn't take the quiet loyalty of an old dog snoring at my feet. And they couldn't take the promise I just whispered into his fur. They'd left me with the two things that mattered: a reason to fight back, and the genius nose that was going to help me do it. The next few years, I disappeared. Not dramatically. No grand exit. I just faded into the background noise of American life, like a million other people who tried and failed. Got a job as a lab tech at a small state university in Riverside, the kind of place where the equipment was older than the students and the coffee machine was held together with duct tape and prayers. The pay was garbage. $22 an hour to run other people's experiments and calibrate equipment that should have been retired during the first Iraq War. But it came with something I hadn't had in years: peace. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like old carpet, and whoever lived there before me really loved curry. Buster had his orthopedic bed. I had my futon from college. We took long walks in the evening when the California heat finally broke. I'd throw a tennis ball that he'd retrieve exactly twice before deciding he was too old for this nonsense. It was simple, quiet, almost boring, almost enough to make me forget. But Leo's empire was everywhere. You couldn't escape it. His face was on magazine covers at the grocery store. His company's logo was on sensors in every data center, hospital, and server farm from San Diego to Seattle. Sensoria AI had become one of those companies that people just assumed had always existed. Like Google, like Apple, a permanent fixture of the technological landscape. I tried not to follow the news. But algorithms are funny that way. They know what you're trying to avoid, and they shove it in your face anyway. Then the tone started changing. It was subtle at first, little cracks in the foundation that only someone looking for them would notice. A tech blog ran a piece about unusual failure rates in the Sensoria sensors. Nothing alarming, just higher than expected, according to anonymous sources within the company. The article disappeared within 24 hours. Probably lawyers. Then a hospital in Phoenix reported losing power to their backup monitoring system. The Sensoria sensors that were supposed to predict a failure had gone dark 30 seconds before the actual crash. The hospital called an anomaly, a one-time glitch. But I knew better. You don't spend 18 months training a dog to smell failure without learning to recognize the scent yourself. And this smelled wrong. Not like a software bug, like something deeper, something structural. I started following the reports more carefully, not obsessively, just casually checking Reddit threads, industry forums, places where the real tech people complained before the PR teams cleaned it up. The pattern was there if you knew how to look. Data centers in Texas, manufacturing plants in Ohio, financial servers in New York, all experiencing the same thing. Sensoria sensors just dying without warning, not gradually degrading like normal electronics. Just sudden, catastrophic failure. And the weird part? The sensors would work perfectly for months, sometimes years, then just stop. No warning, no predictable pattern. Like they were on some kind of timer nobody knew about. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel happy. I felt like I was watching a train derail in slow motion. A train I'd helped design, built by someone who'd ignored every safety warning I'd ever given him. The phone call came on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were when I took Buster to the park near campus where all the college kids would stop and pet him. He loved the attention. Made him feel young again. We'd just gotten home. I was opening a beer. Some cheap IPA that tasted like the brewery had a grudge against hops. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. In this day and age, unknown numbers meant either spam or someone trying to sell you car insurance. But something made me swipe. Heavy breathing on the other end. For a second, I thought it was a prank call. Then I heard my name. Alex? Is this Alex? The voice was familiar, but wrong. Like hearing a recording of yourself played back at the wrong speed. Strained. Exhausted. Desperate. It's Leo. Please don't hang up. I should have hung up right then. Should have blocked the number and gone back to my beer and my simple life. But curiosity is a vicious thing. It gets its hooks in you and won't let go. So I waited. He filled the silence with words that tumbled over each other like he was afraid I'd cut him off if he stopped talking. Told me he needed help, that something was wrong with the sensors, and nobody could figure it out. That his best engineers, people with degrees from MIT and Stanford, were completely stumped. He said the word that must have killed him to say, please. Leo had never said please to me in his entire life. Not when we were kids fighting over the last slice of pizza. Not when he wanted to copy my homework. Never. But he was saying it now, over and over, like a prayer. I told him I'd think about it. The truth was, I already knew I'd see him. Not because I forgave him. Not because I wanted to help. But because I needed to see him like this. Needed to witness the great Leo Reed brought low by the same arrogance that had made him successful. Is that petty? Probably. Did I care? Not even a little bit. He showed up 2 days later. I'd given him my address expecting him to balk, expecting some excuse about scheduling or needing to do this at his office with his team present. But desperation makes people flexible. He pulled up in a Tesla that cost more than I'd earned in 3 years. Matte black, silent, the kind of car that screams I have money, but I'm also environmentally conscious about it. He looked terrible. Not Hollywood terrible where someone misses one haircut, and suddenly they're falling apart. Real terrible. The kind that comes from not sleeping. From stress eating through your stomach lining. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weight he'd lost. His jaw was sharp in a way that wasn't healthy. His eyes had that hollowed-out look of someone running on coffee in fear. Good. He knocked on my door like he was afraid it might bite him. I let him stand there for a solid 30 seconds before opening it. Petty? Yes. Satisfying? Absolutely. Come in, I said. He stepped into my apartment, and I watched his eyes do the math. Cheap furniture. Peeling paint. The faint smell of whatever mysterious stain was under the carpet. This was my life. This was what his betrayal had bought me. To his credit, he didn't comment. Just stood there holding a metal case like it contained the nuclear launch codes. Buster raised his head from his bed, gave Leo the kind of look that dogs give strangers who might or might not be worth the effort barking, then went back to sleep. Even my dog couldn't be bothered to care about Leo anymore. I offered him a seat on my thrift store couch. He sat on the edge like he was worried about what he might catch. He opened the case. Inside was one of the sensorious sensors. Sleek. Beautiful, even brushed aluminum, LED indicators, the kind of industrial design that wins awards. It looked like something from the future. He placed it on my coffee table between us like we were in a hostage negotiation, and this was a ransom. Just look at it, he said. His voice cracked. You always loved puzzles like this. You loved figuring out what everyone else missed. I picked it up. Heavier than I expected. The weight of precision engineering. Of venture capital, of my stolen future wrapped in metal and silicon. He talked while I examined it. Explained the problem in that startup speak he'd mastered. Catastrophic failure rates, unpredictable cascades, mission-critical systems going dark, clients threatening lawsuits, board members demanding answers. The sensors were dying and nobody knew why. His engineers had torn them apart, run every diagnostic. Checked every line of code. Nothing. The hardware was perfect. The software was clean. Yet somehow, after months of operation, they just stopped working. It's like they're cursed, he said. There was something almost funny about that. The golden child of tech finally admitting that something was beyond his understanding. That money and confidence and the reality distortion field that worked on investors didn't work on physics. I turned the sensor over in my hands. Studied the ventilation slits, the connection ports, the sleek minimalism that sacrificed function for form. Then Buster lifted his head. I'd almost forgotten he was there. He'd been so quiet. But something had caught his attention. He stood up slowly, joints creaking, took one step, then another, walked over to the coffee table with that deliberate pace old dogs have when they're conserving energy. Leo waved his hand dismissively. Can you get your dog away? He's distracting me. But I wasn't listening to Leo anymore. I was watching Buster lower his nose to the sensor, watching his nostrils flare as he processed whatever chemical signature was bleeding off that beautiful piece of technology. And then he did it. That soft, anxious whine. The one I hadn't heard in 5 years. The one that meant something was wrong. Something was dying. He scratched at the ventilation grill with his paw. Once. Twice. Time did something funny in that moment. Everything slowed down. Leo's irritated expression. Buster's anxious whine. The weight of the sensor in my hand. And underneath it all, I caught it. That smell. Faint. Barely there. A sharp, acidic note that didn't belong. PX-12. The cheap polymer insulation I'd warned him about 6 years ago. My mind started connecting pieces faster than I could process them. The sensors worked for months because it took that long for polymer to degrade under heat stress. The unpredictable failure pattern because each sensor operated under slightly different conditions. The catastrophic nature of the failures because when PX-12 broke down, it didn't just stop working. It corroded everything around it. Leo had built his billion-dollar empire on a foundation I'd explicitly told him would rot. And the beautiful irony, the tragic poetry of it, his sensors were designed to predict failure in other systems. But they couldn't detect their own death because nobody had programmed them to recognize the chemical signature of their own destruction. They weren't monitoring for catastrophic failure. They were the catastrophic failure. I looked at Buster, still whining softly, still trying to warn me about danger that had already happened. Then I looked at Leo, sitting on my cheap couch in his expensive suit, waiting for me to save him from the consequences of his own arrogance. And I realized something. For the first time in 5 years, I held all the cards. The train wasn't just derailing anymore. It was already off the rails, sliding toward the cliff. And Leo had just handed me the only brake that could stop it. Or not. My choice. I set the sensor down carefully, looked at my brother, really looked at him, saw the desperation, the fear, the hope that his big brother could fix this like I'd fixed his science projects when we were kids. You figured it out, he said. His voice was barely a whisper. I can see it on your face. You know what's wrong. I did. I knew exactly what was wrong. I knew how to fix it. I knew how much it would cost him. I knew that without my help, his empire would collapse within months, that the lawsuits would bury him, that everything he'd stolen from me would turn to ash. And the look on his face told me he knew it too. I needed time to think. I said finally. I stood up, walked to my door, opened it. Leo didn't move at first, just sat there holding on to hope like a life raft. Then slowly, mechanically he stood, picked up his case, walked toward the door. He stopped in the doorway, turned back. I'm sorry, he said, for everything. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry. I didn't respond, just closed the door, locked it, walked back to where Buster was still standing by the coffee table, his duty fulfilled. I knelt down, scratched him behind his gray ears. He leaned into my hand, tail wagging slowly. Good boy, I whispered. You just smelled the future again, didn't you? You just gave me exactly what I needed. Outside, I heard Leo's Tesla pull away, silent and expensive, and carrying a man who finally understood what it felt like to need something you couldn't buy. I sat down on my cheap couch in my cheap apartment with my old dog and stared at nothing. The question wasn't whether I could save Leo's empire. The question was whether I wanted to. And for the first time in 5 years, I smiled. I told Leo the first needed time to think. The second his Tesla pulled away from my apartment, I already knew what I was going to do. I remember the experiment. I remember that smell. I remember the exact moment I'd warned him about PX-12 and watched him dismiss it with that confident smile of his, the smile that said he knew better, that said corner cutting was just smart business. But memory doesn't hold up in court. Memory doesn't shut down a billion-dollar company. I needed proof, paper proof, the kind with dates and signatures and warnings written in my own handwriting. I needed my old lab notebook. The problem was, I hadn't seen that notebook in 5 years. When I'd moved out of my parents' house after Ford's article, after the family dinner where they'd chosen sides, I'd thrown everything into boxes and rented the cheapest storage unit I could find on the edge of town. A mausoleum for my old life. $49 a month to keep my past locked away where it couldn't hurt me anymore. I hadn't been back since. The drive took 30 minutes through Friday evening traffic. The storage facility was one of those depressing orange buildings surrounded by chain-link fence. The kind of place where people keep furniture from dead relatives and Christmas decorations they'll never use again. Unit 237. Second floor. The lock was rusty, but the key still worked. The smell hit me first when I opened the door. Dust. Cardboard. That particular staleness that comes from air that hasn't moved in years. My entire previous existence packed into a 10 by 10 concrete box. I flipped on the light. Single bulb. Harsh. Making everything look even more pathetic than it probably was. Boxes were stacked to the ceiling. I'd labeled them in a hurry during the move. Some said kitchen. Some said books. One said simply stuff because by that point I'd stopped caring about organization. I was looking for the one labeled lab notes. I started pulling boxes down, methodically, like I was defusing a bomb instead of dismantling my own history. There were photographs in one box. Me and Leo as kids. Halloween costumes. Little League. His arm around my shoulder. Both of us smiling like we meant it. I put the lid back on that box without looking further. Another box had birthday cards. From Sarah. From my parents. From people whose names I barely remembered. Evidence of a time when people cared enough to send cards. I pushed it aside. The lab notebook wasn't in any of the boxes I'd labeled. Of course it wasn't. That would have been too easy. I found at the bottom of a box marked college stuff. Under my diploma. Under 3 years of academic journals I'd been published in. Under a coffee mug from a conference in Boston that I thought was important at the time. The notebook was beat to hell. Stained. Pages dog-eared. The spine was cracked from being shoved in and out of backpack pockets. But it was there. My handwriting. My observations. My life's work before Leo turned it into his empire. I sat down on the cold concrete floor. Opened the notebook. The pages smelled like old paper and chemical residue. I flipped through years of experiments. Successes and failures documented in detail that would make a proper scientist proud. This was before everything went digital. Before clouds and servers. This was analog. Real. Permanent. My fingers found the page without me consciously looking for it. October 15th, 2019. Experiment 42. There it was. Written in my handwriting with a red pen I'd probably grabbed from whatever coffee shop I'd been working at that day. The entry was detailed. Temperature readings. Buster's behavioral responses. Timestamps. And there, circled 3 times in red, my warning. Warning! PX. 12 polymer highly unstable under sustained thermal load. Degradation produces corrosive compounds. Do not use in production devices. Not suitable for commercial applications. Find alternative. I remembered writing those words. Remembered the small moment of professional pride, thinking I'd caught a potential disaster before it became real. Remembered showing it to Leo a few weeks later, when he'd asked about material costs. He'd laughed, called me paranoid, said the good stuff was expensive and this was good enough, that I was overthinking things like I always did, that you had to take calculated risks in business. Calculated. Right. Sitting there on that cold floor, holding my own prophetic warning from 6 years ago, I felt something click into place. This wasn't just proof that the sensors were faulty. This was proof that Leo knew they were faulty, that he'd been explicitly warned and chosen profit over safety, that every sense of failure, every lawsuit, every angry client, every data center that went dark wasn't bad luck or unforeseen circumstances. It was negligence, willful negligence, maybe even fraud. I wasn't holding a piece of paper. I was holding a detonator. My phone was in my pocket. I pulled it out, looked at it. 1 call to Leo. That's all it would take. I can name my price. 10 million? 20? A position as CTO with my name on the patents where it belonged? An apology published in Forbes? I could extract everything I'd lost and more. He'd pay it. He was desperate enough to pay anything. That's what a smart person would do. That's what an American would do, right? Get yours. Cash out. Win the game. But I kept seeing their faces. My mother's dismissive pat on my hand. Ideas are just air, Alex. My father's silent agreement. Sarah's eyes as she told me about potential versus results. Leo's smug smile on that Forbes cover. The polite applause at his party while I stood there in my decade-old suit being thanked for my amusing experiments. They hadn't just betrayed me once. They'd systematically erased me, made me a footnote, a curiosity, the quirky older brother who played with dogs while Leo changed the world. There's a quote I read once, something about how the best revenge is living well. That's garbage advice from people who've never actually been betrayed. The best revenge isn't living well. The best revenge is watching the person who hurt you lose everything they took from you, and then building something better from the ruins. Justice isn't getting crumbs from the table you set. Justice is flipping that table and making them watch while you build a new one. I stood up, closed the notebook, held it against my chest like a talisman, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to save Leo's empire. I was going to destroy it. Methodically, legally, completely, and then I was going to build my own on the ashes. I pulled out my phone again, opened the browser, typed in OmniCorp legal department contact. OmniCorp, Sensoria's biggest competitor, the company that had been trying to break into the predictive maintenance market for years and kept getting blocked by Leo's patents and his billion-dollar war chest. They'd been trying to take Leo down through traditional competition, trying to out-innovate him, out-market him, outspend him. But I was about to give them something better than innovation. I was about to give them ammunition. Legal, documented, irrefutable ammunition that would tear apart everything Leo had built. And in exchange, I'd asked for what I should have had from the beginning. Recognition, resources, the ability to do my work without having to choose between rent and research. The contact page loaded. There was a form for general inquiries, a phone number for investor relations, and there, at the bottom, an email address for their legal department with a note. For matters of intellectual property, fraud, or corporate malfeasance, contact our legal team directly. Perfect. I pulled up my email, started typing. My name is Alex Reed. I have information regarding systematic fraud in the design and manufacturing of Sensoria AI sensor systems. I have documented proof that the CEO knowingly deployed defective technology in critical infrastructure. I would like to discuss this matter in person, at your earliest convenience. I attached a photo of the notebook page, just the date and the circled warning. Not enough to show the full story. Just enough to prove I wasn't some crank with an axe to grind. My finger hovered over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. Once I sent this, there was no going back, no reconciliation, no brotherly forgiveness, no family dinners where we all pretended none of this happened. I'd be burning every bridge I had left. My parents would never forgive me. Sarah would think I was vindictive and petty. The tech world would call me a whistleblower or a snake, depending on whose side they were on. But I'd spent 5 years being invisible, being the ghost of someone else's success story, being the guy who let himself get erased because he was too nice, too trusting, too naive to fight back. I was done being that guy. I hit send. The response came in 47 minutes. Mr. Reed, we are very interested in discussing this matter. Would you be available for a meeting Monday morning at our headquarters in San Jose? We will arrange travel and accommodation if needed. This is a priority matter for our executive team. Monday morning, 3 days away. I wrote back, I'll be there. Then I put my phone down, looked around the storage unit one last time, at all the boxes full of who I used to be, at the evidence of a life that had been carefully dismantled by people I'd trusted. I picked up the lab notebook, left everything else. I didn't need the rest of it anymore. Monday morning, I drove to San Jose. OmniCorp headquarters was everything Sensoria's office wasn't, where Leo had chosen glass and minimalism and that Silicon Valley aesthetic that screamed we're disrupting everything. OmniCorp was old money, solid, established, The kind of building that said we've been here longer than your company has existed and will be here after you're gone. Security checked my ID 3 times. Made me turn over my phone. Put it in a locker like I was visiting a prison. Then they escorted me upstairs. The conference room had a view of the entire valley. On a clear day, you could probably see Sensoria's headquarters from here. Today was overcast, which felt appropriate. There were 7 people waiting for me. Suits. Expensive ones. The kind of legal team that bills by the quarter hour and gets results. The head lawyer was a woman named Patricia Chun, late 50s, steel gray hair. The kind of eyes that could read a contract and find a loophole before you finish signing your name. She shook my hand. Firm grip. All business. Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. Please have a seat. I sat, placed my lab notebook on the table between us like I was laying down a royal flush in poker. They all leaned forward slightly. The universal gesture of lawyers smelling blood in the water. I told them everything. Not in the emotional way I'd lived it. In the clinical way that makes for good legal strategy. Dates, documents, warnings given and ignored. The systematic failure pattern. The chemical analysis. Everything. Patricia took notes on a legal pad. Actual paper. Old school. When I finished, she read through her notes in silence for what felt like an hour, but was probably 3 minutes. Then she looked up at me. Mr. Reed, she said, what you're describing isn't just a patent dispute or a trade secret issue. What you're describing is willful fraud in the deployment of safety-critical systems. Your brother didn't just steal your idea. He weaponized it and pointed it at critical infrastructure. She paused, looked at her colleagues. Some silent communication happened that I wasn't part of. If this documentation is authentic, and we have no reason to believe it's not, this is ground for both civil and criminal proceedings. Sensoria's entire product line is liability. Every sensor they've sold is evidence. Every contract they've signed is fraud. Another lawyer spoke up. Younger, probably the tech specialist. We've been trying to break into predictive maintenance for years. Sensoria has that market locked down. But if their sensors are systematically defective, if their entire business model is built on technology they knew was faulty, then every contract they have is void. Every patent they filed is potentially fraudulent. The market opens up completely. Patricia smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. We can destroy them, she said simply, completely, legally. And the best part is, it's not even revenge. It's justice. I should have felt something in that moment. Guilt, maybe, hesitation. Some residual loyalty to the kid who used to be my little brother before he became Leo Reed, tech CEO. But I didn't feel any of that. I felt calm, clear, like I'd been carrying a weight for 5 years, and finally got permission to set it down. What do you want in return? I asked. Patricia slid a document across the table. We want exclusive rights to your biosensory technology, the real version, the one that actually works. We want you to head up a new division, biosensory research and development, unlimited budget, your team, your vision, your name on the door. She slid another document across. $10 million signing bonus. Salary and equity package that makes you one of our key stakeholders. And we fund the lawsuits against Sensoria. Every penny. You don't pay a dime. We do this right. By the end of the year, your brother's company won't exist anymore. She leaned back in her chair. And the market he currently dominates? That becomes yours. Built on technology that actually works. With your name attached to it. Not as a footnote. As a founder. I picked up the contract. Read through it. It was dense. Legal language designed to protect them as much as it empowered me. But the core of it was simple. They were offering me everything I should have had 6 years ago. Everything Leo had stolen. And the weapon to take him down in the process. I looked at Patricia. One condition, I said. When this goes public, when the story breaks, I want my brother to know it came from me. I don't want to be an anonymous source. I want him to see my name on the lawsuit. To know exactly who burned down his empire and why. Patricia smiled again. This time it almost reached her eyes. Mr. Reed, she said, we wouldn't have it any other way. Nothing sends a message quite like having your name on the filing. I signed the contract, all 7 copies, initialed every page. My signature never looked better. When I handed back the last page, Patricia stood, extended her hand again. Welcome to Omnicorp. Let's go make history. The right way this time. I shook her hand. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel revenge. I felt something better. Balance. The universe correcting a mistake it had made 5 years ago. The story broke 3 weeks later. Not in Forbes. Not in TechCrunch. In the Wall Street Journal. Front page. Above the fold for the digital edition. Sensoria AI founder accused of systematic fraud in sensor technology. Whistleblower evidence reveals years of warnings ignored. The article was devastating. Detailed. Sourced. It included excerpts from my notebook. Expert analysis of the PX12 polymer. Testimony from former Sensoria engineers who'd raised concerns and been silenced. The whole ugly truth laid out in black and white. And my name, right there in paragraph 3. Dr. Alexander Reed, former bioengineer and brother Sensoria CEO Leo Reed, has provided evidence suggesting. Within 24 hours, Omnicorp filed their lawsuit. 900 pages of legal documents. Every sensor failure cataloged. Every warning documented. Every contract called into question. The tech press went insane. Reddit threads exploded. Twitter was brutal. Half the people called me a hero. Half called me a traitor who destroyed his own brother out of jealousy. I didn't read the comments. Didn't matter what strangers thought. The dominoes fell faster than I expected. 3 major clients canceled their contracts with Sensoria within a week. Hospital systems, data centers, financial institutions, all demanding refunds, all threatening their own lawsuits. The board called an emergency meeting, demanded answers. Leo told them he'd fix it, that this was a competitor's smear campaign, that the technology was sound. His engineering team contradicted him in the meeting. Several of them resigned on the spot. 2 of them joined our lawsuit with their own evidence. The SEC opened an investigation. The FBI got involved because some of those sensors were in federal facilities. Congress started making noise about tech industry oversight. Sensoria's stock price, which had been trading at $240 a share, dropped to $18 in 2 weeks. Investors filed a class action lawsuit. Everyone who'd lost money wanted blood. Leo's face was everywhere, but not on Forbes covers anymore. On cable news. Looking exhausted, evasive, cornered. His lawyers tried to settle. Offered us everything. Offer me everything. 20 million. 50 million. My name on the company. Whatever I wanted. Patricia Chun laughed when she showed me the offer. They're trying to buy silence. She said, tell them no. I told them no. My parents called. I didn't answer. They left voicemails. My mother crying. My father angry. Asking how I could do this to family. To blood. Telling me I destroyed Leo's life out of bitterness. That I'd torn apart our family. I deleted the voicemails without listening to the end. Sarah called too. Left one message. Just one. I hope it was worth it. Alex. I deleted that one too. 6 months after the story broke, Sensoria AI filed for bankruptcy. The company that had been valued at $3 billion was sold for parts. Patents went to various buyers. Employees scattered to other companies. The office space in Palo Alto got leased to a cryptocurrency startup that probably wouldn't last a year. Leo's name became a cautionary tale. The wunderkind who built an empire on sand. The CEO who ignored warnings until they buried him. I watched it all from my new office at Omnicorp. Corner view. Actually, not even an office. A whole lab. 20,000 square feet of research space. Equipment I'd only dreamed about in my garage days. And Buster, who spent most days sleeping in a corner on a bed that cost more than my first car. I saw Leo one last time. I was leaving work late on a Tuesday. The parking lot was mostly empty. Silicon Valley tech workers like to brag about grinding, but most of them are gone by 6. He was waiting by my car. I almost didn't recognize him at first. The expensive suits were gone. He was wearing jeans, and a hoodie. Regular clothes. His face had aged 5 years and 6 months. His hair was longer, not styled, just neglected. He was leaning against a beat-up Toyota Camry that had seen better decades. His Tesla was long gone. Sold to pay lawyers, probably. I stopped walking. We stared at each other across the parking lot. Two brothers who used to share a room, who used to stay up late playing video games and talking about the future. Before everything went wrong, before he decided my future was his to take. He spoke first. His voice was rough, raw. "You destroyed everything," he said. Not angry, just stated, like he was commenting on the weather. "You destroyed me. You destroyed our family. You took everything I built." I walked closer, stopped about 10 feet away. "No, Leo, I took back what you stole. There's a difference." He shook his head. "I gave you a job offer. You could have worked with me. We could have built it together. $25 an hour," I said. "You offer me $25 an hour to consult on my own invention, after you put your name on my patents, after you cut me out completely. That's not building together. That's throwing scraps to keep me quiet." He didn't have an answer for that. "You could have called me when you figured it out," he said finally, "when you realized the sensors were failing. You could have helped me fix it. We could have done a recall, fix the problem. But you went to Omnicorp instead. You chose revenge over family." I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. "You chose money over family 6 years ago," I said quietly. "You chose your empire over me. Mom and Dad chose you over me. Sarah chose your success over our relationship. Everyone made their choice when it benefited them. I just finally made mine." He looked down at his shoes. Expensive sneakers that were now just shoes. The armor of success stripped away. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time since this whole thing started, he sounded like he meant it. "I'm sorry I took your work. I'm sorry I didn't give you credit. I'm sorry I was an arrogant piece of garbage who thought he was smarter than everyone else." He looked up at me. "But you didn't just take back what I stole. You burned down everything. You salted the earth. There's no coming back from this for me. No second chances. You made sure of that." I thought about that, about whether I had gone too far, whether destroying him completely was justice or just cruelty. Then I thought about sitting in my parents' kitchen while my mother told me my ideas were just air, about standing in that ballroom while Leo thanked me for my amusing experiments, about watching Sarah walk to his Porsche while I sat alone with my cheap pasta. "You built your castle on sand, Leo. I warned you. I begged you to use better materials. You ignored me because corner cutting was more profitable. You didn't fail because of me. You failed because you thought you could cheat physics. Physics doesn't care about your charm or your pitch deck." I walked past him toward my car. Buster was already there, waiting in the back seat, tail wagging because he always wagged his tail when he saw me. Unconditional loyalty. The kind of loyalty Leo never understood. "Wait," Leo called out. I stopped, turned back. "Was it worth it?" he asked. "Destroying me. Was it worth losing your family, your history, everything we were?" I looked at him, really looked at him, saw the wreckage of what he'd become, felt nothing. "The family chose sides long before I did," I said. "And history's written by the winners. Leo, you taught me that. You made sure everyone knew your version of the story. The genius founder who changed the world." I opened my car door. "I'm just making sure history gets a correction. That people know who actually changed the world and who just stole the blueprints." I got in my car. Buster put his head on my shoulder. That heavy, warm presence that had been with me through everything. "Real treasures don't shine, Leo. Sometimes they just snore in the passenger seat and smell like old dog. Sometimes they're the truth you wrote down 6 years ago that nobody wanted to hear. Sometimes they're the courage to burn down everything false so something real can grow in its place." I started the engine, didn't look back. The thing about driving away from your past is that at some point you stop checking the rear view mirror. You just keep your eyes forward and trust that the road ahead is better than the one behind. For the first time in 6 years, I didn't look back. They'd taken my ideas, my girlfriend, my name, They tried to take my future, but they couldn't take who I was. They couldn't take what I knew. And they couldn't take the loyalty of an old dog who'd been right about everything from the beginning. The irony is that by trying to erase me from history, they gave me the chance to write it myself, on my own terms, with my name where it belonged. In business, like in life, truth isn't just the most valuable asset. It's the ultimate leverage. And I just used mine to move the world.